Explanation. Why the traditional terms only become open after many decades after learning and understanding the ancient teachings are openly named and taught in their effectively true value teaching of the truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of the life.
According to the teaching of the sage, my teacher Sfath, and according to the instructive journeys with him into the past, I was taught that various traditional terms and their value, such as in the main spirit, spirit form and spirit teaching, spiritual life, God, gods, and holy, saints, etc., correspond to old word values, which are called Indo-European roots and have been completely falsified. With regard to spirit, this was invented and created from the Indo-European term gheis as the original word, although this originally had the meaning to be upset, to shudder as well as to be frightened and to be excited, but also to be afraid and to be completely horrified as well as to be seized, etc. When the word spiritus is considered in Latin, it does not mean spirit, but translated into German it does not mean spirit, but vapor, breath or also breath sound, hiss, sound, breath of air, sigh, wind, act of life, or breath. So wherever research is carried out, nowhere does the word God emerge from these terms, as is falsely claimed, but rather something that is of a different value and corresponds to pure human impulses. This is also the case with the Latin word spiritus, which means nothing other than breath, or the ancient Greek pneuma, etc. So, for example, the word value of spiritus mundi from Latin does not have the value of world spirit, as is wrongly explained, but rather the value of world wind, world breath, or world breath, etc. The term holy is originally a corruption of the Old High German word heilag. Holy goes back to the Old Norse term heiliger, meaning clear, pleasurable, cheerful, bright, sunny, radiant, as well as later to the Old High German heilig, which had the meaning property or simply own, although this word was also used for happiness and healthy, as well as completely unharmed, and also as intactness and salvation or saved. It was also used as a good omen and as magic, magic healing, and magical. Religious believers, usually fanatics who believed themselves to be scholars, took old words and terms from various languages and falsified them for religious misunderstandings and false explanations, just as the teaching of Nicodemian, which Emmanuel brought, was falsified in a bottomless and boundless lie, which triggered the delusion of Christianity and Islam and is still rampant around the earth today. If we now consider the false word concepts that were coined and falsified centuries ago from old word concepts by completely irresponsible religionists, etc., these were spread worldwide and misteached in all peoples and languages, and indoctrinated into the heads of earth humans in such a way that the whole of the evil false teaching hammered into them cannot be undone again with a bang. Not even by simply eradicating everything that is false through a completely different teaching, namely the teaching of the truth. The fact is that human beings first have to learn before they can recognize something as an effective reality and its truth, and then also comprehend and understand it. And this process already begins in the womb. Despite the fact that the earthly holy sciences of prenatal and perinatal medicine and psychology deny this and still have no knowledge of it. The fact is, as Sfath was able to explain to me very impressively in the 1940s, and also prove in a natural development in a pregnant woman, that after approximately 10 to 14 days after fertilization by the sperm, the egg implants in the uterine lining of the woman. Then, as is normal according to creation, On the 21st day after conception, the embryo comes to life as a result of the creation life energy form moving into the embryo, and thus also enlivening the body of the new personality. The embryo begins to absorb swinging waves and impulses from the mother from the moment the energy is fully absorbed, which results in the promotion of embryonic physiological activity through an absolutely natural stimulus. This means that the absolutely normal process of the functioning of the development of the body and its organs begins, as well as the development of the cognitive abilities of the still absolutely unconscious perception, which strive for the developing and still completely unconscious comprehension of the connections, of which the human being only becomes aware after birth in the course of the first years of his life in the highly active consciousness and conscious thinking and learning, and also remembering begins. However, as explained, this initially only occurs in an unconscious wise, and gradually, only after about the 37th week of pregnancy after birth, in accordance with the slowly following perception of reality and learning, as well as the conscious realization of what is effectively significantly registered. All of this is initially stimulated, developed and stored in the embryo through the influx of the life energy of creation, after which it is continuously absorbed into the developing fetus in order to continue its development. The transformation of the embryo into a fetus, however, only takes place between the 8th and 10th week of pregnancy, which of course also continues to develop unconsciously in terms of formation and absorbs further swinging waves and information in terms of stimuli, which only gradually become conscious and clear to the human being through learning and realization after birth. It is only through the evolutionary development of human beings that they develop good, true and realistic thinking, realization, grasping and understanding of perceptions. But these are initially still overlaid by everything that the embryo has absorbed in terms of stimuli, transferred to the fetus, and brought with it through birth into effective life in existence. In the life of existence, the human being learns both language and also a great deal of what he hears and understands in terms of words and concepts, or is taught or mistaught, that is to say, what meaning they have in a negative or positive sense, regardless of whether they correspond to correctness or not. He memorizes these words and concepts and lives with them, believing them to be correctness. If he does not think about them himself and does not independently fathom whether this or that concept or word actually corresponds or does not correspond to what it expresses. And the fact that human beings do not take this very own self-thinking into account and do not exercise it, but only believe what they hear and what they are beguiled by, is something they eat up in themselves. Therefore he holds on to concepts and words, etc., that he has heard or learnt, but which are completely false, such as the concepts and words God, holy and spirit, etc., which have been falsely reinterpreted by erroneous and confused religious believers from old concepts and words into a false term and a fact-changing expression. In this way, from the point of view of religious belief, various vocabulary originating from ancient languages was absolutely falsely pressed into religiously invented terms and word designations that had completely different meanings. At the time they were used, and in absolutely no wise had anything to do with an imagined and absolutely imaginary or invented God, spirit or saint, etc., and will also never have anything to do with anything. A god, religious or otherwise, has always been nothing more than an imaginary or fantasized concept that is made up and invented, imagined, invented, and assumed. The same applies to the Spirit of God. Spirit, such as spirituality and the absolutely impossible spirituality, but also to the terms holy, holiness, salvation, Trinity, and other various religious phrases that are indoctrinated or hammered into human beings and thus beguilingly mold them into believers in religion. As a result, the believers become alienated from reality and blind to reality, which is also associated with blind fanaticism, which leads to violence being practiced against people of other faiths, or those who are unimpressed by religion, or who have no religious beliefs at all. Religious fanaticism even leads to self-mortification or penance in order to cleanse oneself of sins committed, and also to voluntary deprivation and suffering for the sake of a higher good. As a result, religious fanaticism also leads to self-mortification in the form of fanatical believers beating themselves bloody with chains, scourges, and other harmful instruments, often to the point of unconsciousness and sometimes even death. However, religious fanaticism also leads to believers fabricating or practicing self-mortification as a kind of asceticism, namely by somehow killing off or at least limiting their instincts. Just as the whole crazy fanaticism of faith also leads to the believing human being killing off sensuality, which means, for example, that this leads to a mortification of the flesh. This is done in sick fanaticism with the aim of faith that this will free the human being inwardly for higher things and therefore also for the divine. Now, we have to explain the false doctrine that since the existence of the sevenfold universe, no imaginary God has ever created or created everything, but that without any doubt only that energy and power, which is simply called creation, could do so. And this creation is effectively no being and nothing other than all energy and power, which encompasses everything that exists in all its sevenfold realm of creation or in the block of its 7 universes, which exist in 7 different dimensions within each other. Creation is therefore nature together with all its fauna and flora, the cosmos and all existence in general in the realm of all its 7 universes. The alleged God is therefore not creation, but only an invented and fantasized imaginary being without energy and power. So everything is a lie and deception regarding God and God's spirit, will and power, through which the world, human beings, Adam and Eve, the universe and everything in general was created, as can be read, for example, in the Luther Bible in the Book of Moses as the first sentence, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then the sun and stars, etc., as well as plants and animals." Finally, in Genesis, sentence 26, we read, "And God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image.'" And so far, none of the believers in Christ have apparently noticed that the alleged God is talking about us, or we here, and is therefore not the Lord and Master alone, but also his angels, who are brought into play, who have somehow been involved. And if you look in the Jewish Pentateuch, Book 1 of Moses says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," after which it goes on to say in verse 26, "And God said, 'We will make human beings in our image, in our likeness,' that." Now, what the Islamic Quran says about this is not exactly like this, but it is mentioned, for example, in the first Surah Al-Fatiha, Rukh 4th, the second, i.e. after he had created him, the human being, he gave him the understanding to recognize the essence of all things. And he taught human beings the properties of all things, i.e., he implanted in human beings the ability to know the properties of things. Thus, he provided, and it should also be said that In contrast to the Bible and the Pentateuch, the Quran is much more valuable and better than any other religious work in terms of its value with regard to the words on peace and its pursuit and practice, etc. What is incomprehensible, however, is that degenerate believers in Islam of all people are spreading murder and terror throughout the world, because this corresponds exactly to the opposite of what Muhammad vehemently taught, namely that peace should prevail at all times and never violence. However, this was then attributed to an imaginary Allah by misguided and fanatical scribblers of lies and falsifiers of history, from which a religion very quickly developed that has been spreading murder and destruction in the world by fanatical and misguided believers ever since. This, by the way, is to clarify and help us understand that the actions and behavior of misguided and degenerate believers of any religion have nothing to do with the reality of religious teachings. Consequently, the Ausartungs of all the Islamists who spread murder, hatred and destruction in the world have just as little to do with Islam as the murderous and profiteers of the witch hunts of Christianity also have nothing to do with Islam. But all this is really only in passing. So first, when teaching, the process of grasping and understanding the effective reality and its truth must be taught to human beings, so that they can mentally create the correct perception and understanding from it, so that the process of grasping and understanding could not and must not be prejudged. Only then, when everything can be recognized, comprehended, interpreted and evaluated as effectiveness according to correctness and truth, is the time come to name the new and all-round really clear and realistic as well as truthful values, in order to thereby dissolve the old traditional concepts and words of fraudulent falsehoods, misleadings, lies and misteachings, etc., through effective concepts and words, etc., and to reshape them through truthful word values. This is also the case when the ancient teaching of the truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of the life, which goes back to Nokademion, is taught, so that from now on the truthful terms creation energy and creation life energy are taught and used, and all false unvalues such as God, Spirit and holy are not effectively replaced by the truthfully correct terms, designations and word values, but are corrected. Spirit is to be corrected by creation energy and creation life energy. While God is not a person, figure, or a high being, nor is it omnipotence or the might of life, nor is it an energy and power with superhuman abilities. This is also the case with the divine spirit, which is based only on a religious and faith-based fantasy, lie and imagination, and therefore does not exist in any wise. The word holiness is also only based on faith, lies and fantasies, and like everything that is based on faith, has nothing to do with reality and its truth. And the term holy was remodeled from the Old Norse heilager into the Old High German heilig, which basically meant property, good omen, good health, integrity, and magic, etc. in its time. Just as in a school, teaching with detailed and precise explanations is rightly necessary, as is the comprehension and understanding of the school participants, their ability to grasp and process, but also the ability to reason, because these are indispensable and must be adapted. Consequently, a learning process is required that takes years and possibly even decades. Just as the period of learning countless factors in the existence of life also lasts a lifetime, whereby new insights as well as a grasp and clear understanding of them arise from time to time through learning. Sooner or later, depending on the learning material, A better and clearer understanding of what is to be learnt is achieved and emerges, whereby the human being becomes capable of continuing to deal with higher factors and facts, whereby the old is overtaken and expanded, and perhaps the false and mislearned is weeded out by truth factors and now learnt in accordance with reality. But for this to happen, it is first necessary to learn and understand in detail what is truthful. After which, for example, the old and the false, as well as the erroneously conventional, must first be eliminated or corrected and expanded by something new. What is really to be repeated here is that it is effectively necessary to correct the old and eliminate the false. This, just as truthfulness and newness require correct learning, and the whole requires truthful comprehension and understanding, which is clear. It must be clear that every false knowledge can never be replaced by the truth, but can only be painstakingly learnt anew through appropriate true learning, study, and also through the necessary understanding of the truth. This is also the case with the entire creation energy teaching, which also includes the teaching of creation energy, life energy, and every other creation energy teaching. The prerequisites for understanding the new concepts and words are, of course, the learner's ability to comprehend and process, as well as the learner's ability to use sound reason and logic. These must be continuously grasped and comprehended, and thus applied in a good and correct way and with careful consideration. This is the only way to ensure that no new beliefs arise and that no contradictory misconceptions can also be attacked, which is the only way to guarantee effective success. Only in this way can the learning material become successful and useful in order to do justice to reality and its truth, and no longer simply consume faith. The human being who is addicted to a belief is only devoted to low intelligence, whereby stupidity means absolute non-thinking and has nothing to do with not being normal, as human beings generally misinterpret and misunderstand this. The human being afflicted by pathological low intelligence or non-thinking is fundamentally a very fearful coward, which he naturally denies in his stupidity because he is unable to recognize it himself.